Narcissistic men are often perceived as intensely heterosexual because they pursue women, seek relationships, marry, have children, and build lives that appear conventional. On the surface, everything fits the cultural picture of masculinity. But if you examine the emotional architecture beneath these relationships, a very different pattern sometimes emerges. Their deepest emotional investment is not always directed toward their romantic partner. Instead, it may be invested in status, admiration, competition, and the approval of other men. This observation is not about sexual orientation. It is about where emotional significance and identity are anchored. It is important to be careful here. This pattern does not apply to every narcissistic man, and it is not a diagnostic criterion for narcissistic personality disorder. Rather, it describes a dynamic that many psychologists and clinicians have discussed in relation to narcissistic traits: the tendency to organize one's identity around external validation, particularly within male hierarchies. Many narcissistic men grow up believing that love is conditional. They learn early that acceptance depends on performance, achievement, strength, or superiority. As adults, they continue chasing the feeling they never fully received. Their romantic relationships often become another arena where they seek admiration, but the audience they care about most is frequently other men. Notice how much energy some narcissistic men devote to proving themselves in male-dominated environments. They obsess over career titles, income, expensive possessions, physical dominance, athletic success, social influence, or being perceived as the man. None of these pursuits are unhealthy by themselves. Ambition is normal. The difference lies in the emotional intensity attached to them. A healthy person enjoys success because it reflects meaningful work or personal growth. A narcissistic individual often experiences success primarily as proof of superiority. The achievement is less important than what it communicates to others. Who are those others? Very often they are other men. A promotion matters because male colleagues will envy it. A luxury car matters because other men will notice it. An attractive partner matters because she becomes evidence of his status in front of male peers. Even conversations about romantic relationships may become performances designed to establish dominance. Stories are exaggerated, victories are highlighted, and vulnerabilities disappear. Relationships become trophies rather than intimate connections. This is why some partners eventually feel invisible. They begin realizing that they are not loved as independent human beings, but appreciated as symbols. The woman becomes part of the narcissist's personal brand. She reflects his success. She enhances his image. She increases his social value. But the emotional audience remains elsewhere. Psychologically speaking, narcissism often revolves around shame. Beneath grandiosity lies an unstable sense of self that constantly seeks reinforcement. Because identity feels fragile, admiration functions almost like emotional oxygen. Without it, the narcissistic self begins to collapse into insecurity, humiliation, and self-doubt. Male approval carries particular weight because many narcissistic men unconsciously organize the world as a hierarchy of winners and losers. Within that hierarchy, men represent competitors, judges, rivals, and authority figures. Winning their admiration feels like winning existence itself. This helps explain why some narcissistic men appear emotionally detached from their wives while becoming intensely animated around male friends, business associates, coaches, or mentors. Around women, they may seem emotionally unavailable. Around admired men, they suddenly become energetic, expressive, competitive, and eager to impress. Again, this does not reflect hidden sexual attraction. It reflects psychological dependency. The validation they receive from respected male figures temporarily repairs their fragile self-esteem. This dynamic can also explain why criticism from another man often devastates a narcissist far more than criticism from a romantic partner. A wife may express disappointment repeatedly without producing lasting change. But a respected male colleague making one dismissive comment can trigger days of rage, obsession, or humiliation. Why? Because the criticism threatens the identity he has been trying so desperately to construct. Similarly, praise from another successful man can produce an emotional high that lasts for days. His confidence suddenly returns, his mood improves, his sense of importance expands. The external approval temporarily fills the emptiness inside. Romantic relationships, unfortunately, often suffer because intimacy requires something narcissism struggles to provide. True intimacy involves equality. It requires mutual vulnerability. It asks two people to know each other beyond appearances. But narcissistic defenses are built specifically to avoid exposing vulnerability. Instead of emotional closeness, the narcissist often substitutes admiration. Admiration feels safer than intimacy. Admiration creates distance. Love requires openness. Admiration only requires performance. As a result, many partners describe feeling emotionally lonely despite living with someone who constantly talks about love, loyalty, and commitment. The words are present. The emotional availability is not. Much of the narcissist's psychological energy remains invested in maintaining an image rather than nurturing a relationship. This is why achievements often become addictive. There is always another promotion, another purchase, another competition, another audience, another opportunity to prove superiority. The validation never lasts. It fades quickly, demanding another accomplishment to restore the inflated self-image. Many psychoanalytic thinkers have described narcissism as an endless search for mirroring. The narcissist wants someone to reflect back an idealized version of who they believe themselves to be. Romantic partners are often expected to play this role, but so are bosses, mentors, influential friends, and admired competitors. Whoever provides the strongest reflection temporarily becomes psychologically indispensable. The problem is that real relationships cannot survive when one person exists primarily as a mirror. Eventually, mirrors stop reflecting perfectly. Partners develop needs, they express disappointment, they ask for reciprocity, they point out inconsistencies. When that happens, the narcissist may respond with defensiveness, anger, withdrawal, or devaluation because the mirror has stopped serving its function. Interestingly, many narcissistic men devote enormous effort to appearing dominant while privately feeling controlled by the opinions of others. Their freedom depends on approval. Their confidence depends on applause. Their identity depends on comparison. They appear powerful, yet psychologically they remain remarkably dependent. This dependence is often hidden beneath confidence. Outwardly, they seem fearless. Internally, they constantly ask invisible questions. Am I winning? Am I respected? Am I admired? Am I better than him? Notice that these questions revolve around comparison rather than connection. Healthy self-esteem grows from internal stability. Narcissistic self-esteem grows from external measurement. That measurement frequently occurs within male status hierarchies because those environments provide clear opportunities for comparison. Some women eventually notice that arguments are rarely about the relationship itself. Instead, conflicts often emerge after something happens outside the relationship. A failed business deal, a public embarrassment, someone else receiving recognition, another man's success. The narcissist returns home emotionally dysregulated, and the partner becomes the safest target for displaced frustration. The relationship absorbs wounds that originated elsewhere. This emotional displacement further illustrates where the psychological center of gravity actually resides. The partner experiences the consequences, but she was never the source, nor was she the primary focus. This pattern also explains why some narcissistic men seem incapable of celebrating another man's success without immediately redirecting attention toward themselves. Comparison is automatic. Someone else's achievement becomes a threat rather than an inspiration. If another man succeeds, the narcissist feels smaller. If another man fails, the narcissist feels larger. Self-worth fluctuates according to the surrounding hierarchy. The tragedy is that this endless competition prevents genuine peace, because there will always be someone richer, someone stronger, someone younger, someone more accomplished, someone more admired. A life organized entirely around comparison becomes emotionally exhausting. Meanwhile, the romantic partner often wonders why love never feels secure. She may give affection, offer support, remain loyal through difficult times. Yet she cannot satisfy the narcissist's deepest psychological hunger, because that hunger was never about love alone. It was about repairing an unstable identity. No partner can permanently heal that wound through admiration. Eventually, the cycle repeats. More achievement, more validation, more comparison, more emptiness. Understanding this distinction helps explain why relationships with highly narcissistic individuals can feel profoundly confusing. The issue is not necessarily the absence of attraction or even the absence of affection. Rather, the relationship competes with a much larger psychological project, preserving an idealized self-image through constant external validation. For lasting change to occur, that individual would need to shift from building identity through admiration to developing identity through self-awareness, accountability, emotional regulation, and authentic connection. That process is difficult because it requires confronting the very shame that narcissistic defenses were designed to conceal. Only when validation becomes less important than genuine intimacy can relationships stop functioning as stages for performance and begin functioning as places of mutual growth, trust, and emotional presence. I'm talking about something far more corrosive, an addiction to male approval, an obsession with proving their dominance to other men, and a quiet, deeply held conviction that women are somehow less than, somehow broken, somehow not worth taking seriously. This isn't simple attraction to male company. This is emotional dependency dressed up as masculinity. And underneath that dependency is something uglier, a raw, unfiltered form of misogyny. These men treat the women in their lives as prizes to be won and displayed, while treating other men as figures to be worshipped and appeased. A man like this can be tender with his wife behind closed doors, share intimacy with her, build a home with her, and then turn around and spend hours consumed by anxiety over whether his friend's father thinks he's living his life correctly or whether his own brother approves of the choices he's making. His sense of what it means to be a man doesn't come from within. It's handed to him by a circle of male figures whose judgment matters infinitely more to him than the emotional well-being of the woman he claims to love. That's the core of what makes him so dependent on male dominance. Not strength, but a desperate, hollow need to be seen as strong by other men. Hello, I'm Danish. I work in narcissistic abuse recovery, and this channel exists because I've spent years studying a pattern that most people sense but rarely name out loud. What I'm going to walk you through today isn't some abstract theory I picked up from a textbook. It's something I lived through. It played out inside my own family, right in front of me, for as long as I can remember. And if you've survived narcissistic abuse yourself, there's a good chance you've felt this exact dynamic without ever having the language to describe it. So today, we're going to name it, and we're going to call it what it is. Let me be clear about something first. This has nothing to do with sexual orientation. A gay man might feel no sexual attraction to women whatsoever, and that says nothing about how he views them as people. In fact, plenty of gay men build some of the deepest, most respectful friendships of their lives with women precisely because they can see them clearly, their intelligence, their strength, their full humanity, without the noise of attraction getting in the way. A narcissistic man is a completely different story. He might be straight, married, raising children, sleeping in the same bed every night with a woman he calls his partner, and still, somewhere underneath it all, he views her as fundamentally lesser. In his mental hierarchy, women exist to manage emotions, provide care, and decorate the background of his life. He doesn't take her ideas seriously. He doesn't respect her right to speak up. He doesn't value her independence. What he actually wants is for her to orbit his ego quietly, without ever challenging him, guiding him, or growing alongside him as an equal. And here's where it gets genuinely twisted, psychologically speaking. A man like this doesn't function as his own person. He functions as an extension of what other men expect from him. His sense of identity isn't built on his own values, his own integrity, his own sense of truth. It's built entirely on how other men perceive him. What terrifies him more than almost anything is the possibility of being seen as weak, soft, overly emotional, or, worst of all, controlled by a woman. In his mind, that would be the ultimate humiliation. That's precisely why he'll choose to betray his wife before he'll risk disappointing his brother. That's why he'll gamble with the stability of his entire family just to protect his standing inside the male hierarchy he's built his whole identity around. This isn't just some sociological concept I picked up from research. This was the air I breathed growing up. My own father was, in every meaningful sense, a psychological shadow of his father before him, Every decision that shaped our household, no matter how large or how small, passed through an invisible council made up of my grandfather and my father's brothers. My mother cooked for the family, cleaned for the family, worked to help support the family, and still, none of that labor bought her a seat at the table. She never got to weigh in on where we lived, which school I attended, whether we took out a loan, whether we invested in land. Even though, ironically, she carried her own covert narcissistic tendencies, her voice in that household was always treated as optional, something that could be considered or dismissed depending on the mood of the room. My grandfather's opinion, though, my uncle's opinions, those weren't optional. Those were treated as sacred, untouchable, final. There were entire stretches of time where we, as a family living under one roof, had no idea what was actually happening in our own home. My father kept things from us. He operated in secrecy, holding information back from the people who lived with him every single day. But his brothers knew. His father knew everything, always. It was like a closed circle of men, emotionally bonded only to each other, feeding off each other's egos and sense of importance, while treating the wives and daughters in their lives as background characters in a story that was somehow always about them. The women handled the actual work of running a household and raising children. The men handled the decisions. That was never spoken out loud as a rule, but everyone understood it as one. None of these men were truly living their own lives. They were performing an idea of masculinity for an audience made up entirely of other men, and because it was a performance, none of it was real. It was a hollow display of dominance, calibrated entirely around how the other men in the room would react. It was never rooted in honesty, fairness, kindness, or genuine stability. It was rooted in pride, in control, in protecting a reputation. And here's the irony that took me years to fully understand. These men believed themselves to be alphas, dominant in control, when the truth was the exact opposite. They were emotionally hollowed out. Not one of them could make a real decision without first running it through the filter of what the other men would think. They feared rejection from their male peers more than they feared causing real lasting pain to their own wives. That's not strength. That's a man so dependent on the approval of patriarchy that it becomes almost tragic to witness, pathetic in one sense and genuinely dangerous in another. Now let's get specific, because I want you to be able to recognize this pattern in real life, not just as an abstract idea. Here are the signs that tell you this dynamic is actually playing out in a relationship. The first sign, he minimizes his wife's opinions the moment other men are around. She might make a completely valid point, and instead of engaging with it, he'll cut her off, turn it into a joke, or steer the conversation somewhere else entirely. It's not because she's wrong, it's because he can't stand the idea of looking like a man who takes direction from a woman in front of his male friends. The second sign, his entire personality shifts depending on who's in the room. Around his male circle, he gets louder, more aggressive, more dismissive toward his wife, his girlfriend, even his own kids. He slips into an exaggerated, hyper-masculine version of himself, one with zero patience for softness, emotion, or compromise of any kind. The third sign, the biggest decisions in his life get made between him and his male relatives long before his wife hears a single word about them. She might share his home, raise his children, build an entire life alongside him, and still be the very last person informed. His father, his brother, his friends get the news first, every single time. The fourth sign, he protects loyalty to men over loyalty to his own partner. If one of his male relatives mistreats his wife, he'll defend the man, not her. He'll bend logic, shift blame onto her, twist the situation until she starts questioning whether she's the one overreacting. The fifth sign, he benefits from her labor without ever sharing real power with her. She can work alongside him, earn income for the household, take care of him emotionally and physically, and he'll still deny her any real authority over shared decisions. Everything she contributes gets treated as something she owes him, not something that earns her equal standing. The sixth sign, he idolizes dominance and quietly views anything feminine as weakness. He mocks men who show emotion. He shames women who take charge or lead. To him, submission is inherently feminine and therefore something to be looked down on. So he buries every real feeling under sarcasm, cold silence, or bursts of anger. The seventh sign, He talks about his wife with his male circle, not to seek genuine advice, but to boost his own image, to prove he's the one in charge, to perform a version of control for an audience. Meanwhile, she has no idea her private life is being picked apart like gossip at a card table. The eighth sign, and this one matters a lot. He cannot tolerate being criticized by a woman, but he'll absorb the exact same criticism just fine coming from a man. If his wife challenges something he's done, he either explodes or shuts down completely. But if another man points out the same flaw, he'll actually listen, reflect, maybe even thank him for it. That's not a difference in sensitivity. That's a difference in who he considers worthy of correcting him. The ninth sign, he doesn't relate to his wife as an equal partner. He relates to her more like a service provider. Her emotional needs become burdens to him. Her boundaries feel disrespectful to him. Her intelligence feels threatening to him. He isn't looking for an equal to build a life with. He's looking for someone to absorb his emotional needs without asking anything in return. The 10th sign, he fears being shamed by other men more than he fears the actual failure of his relationship. If his male friends mock him for letting his wife have equal say in something, he would rather blow up the entire marriage than risk being seen as weak by men who, frankly, don't even deserve his respect. And that right there tells you everything. That's not psychological heterosexuality. That's a warped kind of brotherhood, one that survives only by suppressing women and constantly seeking approval from other men. Inside this kind of dynamic, a narcissistic man can never build true intimacy with a woman because real intimacy demands more than physical closeness. It demands vulnerability. And vulnerability is the one thing his male circle will never tolerate. So he stays emotionally shut off, even while remaining sexually active, permanently tethered to the approval of the men around him instead of to the woman standing right in front of him. Let's not soften this or dance around it. What we're describing is misogyny, plain and simple. This isn't just a man who happens to enjoy male friendships more than female ones. This is a worldview where women get reduced to tools, to caretakers, to distractions from what he considers his real life. It's a world where a man can marry a woman, build a family with her, rely on her in every practical sense, and still genuinely believe she doesn't deserve to be informed about decisions concerning her own life. A world where a woman can share a bed with her husband every night and still feel, in every way that matters, like an outsider in her own home. That was the world my father lived in. In many ways, he still does. And he wasn't unique in his family. Every man around him treated the women in their lives the exact same way. I grew up watching men dismiss their wives as an afterthought while bowing and scraping for the approval of their male elders. It wasn't subtle disregard either. These women were belittled, mocked, and erased, often behind closed doors where no outsider could witness it. Inside the home, it was the woman holding everything together. Outside the home, her voice simply didn't register. That contradiction, lived out day after day, does real damage. It damages children who grow up absorbing it as normal. It slowly erodes marriages from the inside, and it gets passed down generation after generation like an inheritance nobody asked for. This is exactly why I say narcissistic men aren't psychologically straight, even when everything about their sexual behavior says otherwise. Because being straight, in any meaningful sense, was never only about who you're physically attracted to. It's about your internal orientation toward the people you claim to love, your respect for women as equals, your genuine capacity to bond emotionally, your willingness to see a woman as a whole human being rather than a role she's expected to play. A man who fears a woman's intellect but craves male validation isn't living out a healthy heterosexuality. He's living as a psychological servant to patriarchy. He isn't actually building a shared life with his wife. He's using her physically while outsourcing his entire emotional and intellectual life to other men. So if you're a woman reading or watching this and you recognize even a piece of your own life in what I've just described, if you feel invisible inside your own marriage, if you're carrying the emotional and practical weight of your household while your husband still runs every major decision past his father, his brother, or his friends first, if he mocks your voice but takes advice from a man who barely has his own life together, if you feel married on paper but somehow permanently outside the actual inner circle of your relationship, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not imagining things and you are not overreacting. You're perceiving something real, something that's very easy to gaslight someone out of trusting. And that clarity you're building right now is exactly what threatens this kind of dynamic the most. And to any man listening to this who feels a flicker of recognition, maybe even some defensiveness rising up, I want to leave you with a few honest questions. If your wife and your closest male friend gave you completely opposite advice on something important, whose opinion would actually carry more weight in your decision? If your father disapproved of a choice you made, but your wife stood firmly behind it, would you move forward or would you quietly back down? If your partner told you she was in real emotional pain, would your first instinct be to sit with that and validate her? Or would you find yourself calling your brother afterward to ask if you're being too soft for caring? Your honest answers to those questions will tell you far more about your own psychology than anything related to your sexual preference ever could. Being psychologically straight in the way that actually matters means respecting women on an emotional level, not just desiring them physically. It means recognizing them as complete human beings, not just as roles assigned to them: wife, mother, caretaker. It means building a life where her voice carries just as much weight as your father's opinion ever did growing up. And until men are willing to sit with that discomfort and actively unlearn this dependency on male approval, they'll keep calling themselves straight, calling themselves alphas, all while quietly living as closeted misogynists hiding behind the language of masculinity. That brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope this gave you some real clarity, maybe even some language for something you've sensed for a long time but never had the words for. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely like to hear how this lands for you. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care of yourself and let the healing begin.